Alright, what's up guys? Brian here, and this is my NXT review. A bit of a new thing I'm going to do here where I'm going to be reviewing the episodes of NXT each week. I've been a big fan of NXT since its inception, so I figure I'd give my thoughts on this week's episode. So let's just get right into it. There was a match to determine who was going to be joining Kairi Sane, the winner of the Mae Young Classic, in a fatal four-way at NXT TakeOver Houston for the vacant NXT Women's Championship. There were two squash matches, and the main event was a bit of a rematch from NXT TakeOver Brooklyn 3. So let's get right into the review. Of course, this past Wednesday was NXT's latest episode. So we started off with a triple threat match where the winner would go on to, like I mentioned, join Kairi Sane in a fatal four-way match at NXT TakeOver Houston for the vacant NXT Women's Championship. This matchup involved three of NXT's women in their division, in the women's division. It was Peyton Royce taking on Liv Morgan and Nikki Cross of Sanity. This was actually a pretty solid, pretty good matchup, a triple threat match. The ending saw the continued build-up of the feud between Sanity and the Undisputed Era of Adam Cole, Bobby Fish, Kyle O'Reilly. They actually came on stage with one of the participants of the in the Mae Young Classic. What was her name? Tanira Conti. Obviously, they're recruiting her to give them a bit of a even ground with Sanity. She would get involved. That being Conti would get involved, and she would cost Nikki Cross this matchup, as it would be Peyton Royce who would score the win in this match. And that was pretty much it. I really like this feud with Sanity and Undisputed Era. Where it goes, we'll have to wait and see. So that was pretty much it for that. And like I said, both sides are now even. Sanity's got 4 members, and Undisputed Era has 4 members, as it seems now. So we'll have to wait and see what goes on with that. Let's see what else. We had the debut of Lio Rush on NXT. He took on the Velveteen Dream, who has been in a bit of a feud, or not a bit of a feud, but is trying to get the attention of one Aleister Black. Velveteen Dream, he picked up the win in this one with the Purple Rainmaker elbow on Lio Rush. So that was pretty much it for that match. Afterwards, he would basically mock Aleister Black, and sitting the way Aleister Black sits in the ring, that being Velveteen Dream, and basically telling him to say his name. He wants him to say his name. All this stuff. A very unique character in NXT right now, that being the Velveteen Dream. So very unique character. So, but a big win for Velveteen Dream this week on NXT. We had Lars Sullivan in a squash match against Danny Birch. This one came about because of 2 weeks ago, Lars was in a match with Oney Lorcan, pretty much dominated that one, and then Danny Birch, after the match was over, Lars was gonna go after Oney Lorcan, beat him down some more, and Danny Birch kind of got his attention and was able to get only Lorcan out of the ring. However, this week on NXT, Danny Birch was not so lucky as Lars Sullivan, in a squash match, as I mentioned, defeats Danny Birch with the sideways spine buster type move. So that was pretty much it for that. We had the Street Profits, another very unique tag team in NXT right now, very popular with the fans. They scored a win in a tag team match against two guys that I didn't really catch their names. They announced that next week they're going to have an exclusive interview with NXT champion Drew McIntyre to get his thoughts on what took place last week. I believe it was last week when he defended the NXT championship against Roderick Strong. After that match, the question about Roderick Strong was, is he going to be a part of the Undisputed Era? Adam Cole, Bobby Fish, Kyle O'Reilly, they came to the ramp after Strong and McIntyre's match was over, and basically was like talking to Roderick Strong while Drew McIntyre watched from the ring. So they're going to be talking to Drew McIntyre next week to get his thoughts on that situation. And that brings us to the main event, which, as I mentioned, was a rematch from NXT TakeOver Brooklyn. It was Johnny Gargano, Johnny Wrestling, taking on Andrade Cien Almas, who had Zelina Vega in his corner. Of course, if you remember, back at TakeOver Brooklyn 3, back in August, these two fought, and because of the distraction from Zelina Vega, Almas scored the win over Johnny Gargano. But this week, they tried to do that kind of bit again. Zelina Vega, she got on the apron near the end of the match, and as Gargano had Andrade in a submission, and she was wearing a DIY shirt. And of course, Gargano's history with DIY, and with Tommaso Ciampa and Ciampa turning on him back at NXT TakeOver Chicago, I believe it was. That whole situation. She tried to play the mind game with him again, with Gargano again with that. Gargano's like, you know what? That ain't gonna work. That ain't gonna work this time. He locked in the submission again, but Andrade got to the ropes, and then pretty much Andrade Cien Almas picked up the win with the hammerlock DDT after Gargano Andrade hit Gargano with a drop toe hold into the bottom turnbuckle, and that allowed Andrade to finish off Gargano with the hammerlock DDT. My thoughts on this matchup, I thought that their match at TakeOver was a lot better than this one. I mean, they did work well together both times, but I thought that this week's match was not as good as their match at TakeOver Brooklyn 3. So, where does Gargano go from here? Obviously, he allows himself to get distracted because of the whole DIY situation and that breakup with him and Ciampa. So where does he go from here? And where does Andrade Cien Almas go from here? Does he go for the NXT? Does he go to challenge? Will they give him a title shot? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But overall, my thoughts on this week's episode. I actually thought this week's episode was pretty good. A lot of building up for as far as some of their feuds. We found out, as I mentioned, that Peyton Royce is the second woman to qualify to be in that fatal four-way at TakeOver Houston. So she'll join Kairi Sane big victory for Andrade Cien Almas once again over Johnny Gargano. And of course, the continuation of the feud between the Undisputed Era and Sanity. So that whole situation. So let's see what happens next week. Another match that I know they announced next week is, speaking of Sanity and Undisputed Era, they're going to be facing off in a 6-man tag team match next week, so that should be interesting to see what happens there. But overall, my thoughts on this week's episode was, I thought it was a pretty good episode. So if you guys watched NXT and watched this week's episode, let me know what you guys thought of it in the comments below. This has been my first edition of NXT review of this week's episode. As always, I am Brian, and thank you for watching.